Thank you very much, Matthew. This is lovely, and I'm delighted to be invited. I'm very thrilled, and I just hope you're going to enjoy my story. And my Scottish Art Archive is quite a lot of it is online already. So I hope after this talk you'll have a look. And my story begins in 1980. In 1980, I went out for dinner, and they sat me beside the editor of the Herald. And I had just seen a show at the fruit market, and I was very enthusiastic. So I said to the editor, you really must get somebody to cover this. And he said, well, you do it. And that was how I started. And 45 years on, I'm still writing for the Herald. I had, in fact, already for the previous 2 years from 78, I had been writing a very small column for the local newspaper. This is actually the biggest piece I ever did, which is the opening of the Hunterian Art Gallery in 1980. So I had a bit of practice, but only very local. And this is my screen print done at the Glasgow Print Studio. It's just to prove I can get my hands dirty. And this is my screen print of the Hunterian, looking down on it from the University Library where I then worked. So unbeknownst to me, in ignorance, the Herald was moving to a new home, as you see here in Albion Street, with all modern modcons. So photographs, I have about 40,000 photographs. All of this is going to the National Gallery of Scotland. And I was lucky in not just being sat next to the editor, but in that my parents were very visual people. My mother was a sculptor, and that's her nude figure in the centre. My father was a professional photographer. And the camera that you see, the Agfa camera, is the one that I used for many, many years, and I still have it. And my father gave it to me. It has a very good lens. So the point of an archive is that other people can use it. And just this week, or within the last day or so, I think it's still on, actually, right now, a show at Glasgow Art School to celebrate the centenary of Bet Low. And the organisers there were very delighted to discover that I had photographs, as you can see, Bet Low on the left, posing in her studio. In the centre, my catalogue, one of my catalogues for Bilcliffe, her Bilcliffe show. And then there's on the right, you can see some of my articles, interviews with her for the Herald, etc. So that's just what should be, how it should be used. Here is 1997, I think, in Berlin. And these are some of the Tate Turner Prize winners from Glasgow School of Art. Richard Wright is in the middle. He's the tall guy. And there's my photograph. And Jackie Donachie on the left. And then, actually, the way it's come up, Richard didn't have his head cut off. It's just the A3 size Xerox. But there's again, if I travelled, and I travelled a lot, and if I was in far-flung New Zealand, or somewhere I went to India, Bulgaria, places like that, I did the photography. So this is my archive. This is how it looks. The red envelopes have photographs. The turquoise boxes cluttering up my house are where the photographs are filed, all chronologically. And what I call the bound books, there's 30 of them, covering 30 years of the Herald and then the Financial Times. They are not yet at the National Gallery, but they will be. And if I hadn't have done all this hard work to spoon feed you all, you would have to go to the Mitchell, make an appointment, pay, I think now, and ask somebody to go to the basement and bring out one of these huge, very heavy volumes of, that one is Glasgow Herald 1981. It weighs a ton, and often actually there's 2 or 3 leather-bound volumes. That's the only way you can get, because this is not all online. Everybody says that it's all online, and it's not online, and even the Financial Times and the Scotsman are all the same, not online. This is my favourite photograph. 2014, in the iconic, beautiful library of Glasgow School of Art that burnt twice. And this was just when I was giving my scribbles and drafts to the art school. They got very wet, but they weren't burnt, and they were freeze-dried, and you can go and look at my scribbles in the archives of Glasgow School of Art. This is just to show you the sort of cover is not very interesting. And there are always people, they matter more than anything, don't they? So these 2 guys, the guy in the suit is Dennis Farr, who went on to run Birmingham and the Courtauld. He was at Glasgow University, and he's the guy who in the early 60s, in the middle 60s, maybe the middle 60s, got me to, or asked me to be a researcher for the Paul Mellon Foundation. And I didn't stay with an academic life because I went into journalism, but he was a lovely guy, and he got me started in as a research job. And then in the top right is Roger Bilcliffe, and he is famous for his Macintosh books. And I went to see him one day in his gallery, and he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Oh, tearing up all this stuff, all these letters and these pieces of paper and letters from Third Eye and stuff." And he said, "You can't do that. It's history." So that's entirely due to Roger that I didn't throw out all my stuff. And that's how I come to have an archive. So here's the Queen and the wonderful Lord Provost, Michael Kelly. He's the guy who was always prepared to be on the television telling everybody how Glasgow is miles better. And here is the opening of the Burrell, October 1983. Now, it's gone into urban legend that it's the Burrell that turned Glasgow from being this slum city that just had the Gorbals to being somewhere that was enlightened and full of interest in the visual arts. I don't think it's necessarily all due to the Burrell. One of the things about the arts and the visual arts is that there's always a lot of controversy, which is great for a writer. You can see here that right at the very beginning, the Burrell Gallery was a victim of its own success. It had too many people. And then on the right side, by 2022, it didn't have enough people, so they did a makeover. I'm afraid I didn't like all of the makeover. Some of it was very good because it needed a new roof, but some of it not so good. These are photographs of the original interior of the Burrell, which they've done away with. The one of the oak room was in Mr. Burrell's will, that he wanted that, and they did away with it. They did away with the trees, which were lovely. However, so other things were happening in 1983. Transmissions, which is the home of the very Cutting Edge and Tate Turner Prize winners. That opened in the same year as the Burrell. Glasgow Print Studio, which is close to my heart, opened in 1972, and I went there as soon as it was opened. I became a member. And more controversy here, believe it or not, there was a shortfall or a gap in the funding, a funding gap for the Hunterian. And so what did the university do but send 11 Whistler paintings to London to be sold? So luckily, there was enough of a row in the press, and they didn't get sold, and Glasgow got them back. But the university didn't learn and proceeded the next time to try and sell some of the Hill Adamson photographs. So there you go. The Death and Taxes carries on. There's a protest against Arts Council cuts, 1984 in London. Everybody's still protesting. And then in 84 opened the Gallery of Modern Art, which you'll all know. But I remember it had been an orphanage. And I remember being there and being able to stand in the basement and look up to the sky, because it wasn't ruined, but it was needing a whole lot of work, but it's turned out to be wonderful. So all this was happening. And then in 82, which was one of my first real exciting trips, I did travel a lot after this, but it set the scene. In Berlin, which was still divided, the wall was very much there. And if you look at the building on the right, and there's a dark bit behind it, and that is the Berlin Wall. And they had restored the building was the equivalent of our V&A and had been bombed in the war, but they had restored it beautifully. And they had this international extravaganza. Bruce MacLean, who is showing as we speak in the Gallery of Modern Art in Edinburgh, he was the representative from Britain, but there were a lot of German artists. In the you can see on the left side, Joseph Beuys had an installation there. And I may say that Joseph Beuys gave me a piece of cake that was covered in gold leaf. And I kept the piece of cake until I moved to America, and then it got lost. But the Baselitz in the centre, that was when he had a sculpture for Edinburgh. He was known for doing his portraits upside down. Some of you know his work. But he hung on a big long pole. He hung his picture over the Berlin Wall. And there were lots of landmines, and the poor wee rabbits that ran across got blown up. You could hear them every night. So he had his picture, of course, a political gesture. So, excited by all this, heaven knows, I've been trying to remember now how on earth I did this. But in 1983, Britain had this huge festival of art saluting New York, because it was 200 years since the end of the American Revolution. So they'd had 200 years of peace. They had the Royal Ballet, the Royal Shakespeare Company, they had every opera company, they had Henry Moore down Park Avenue, Constable at the Met, Holbein at the Morgan, etc. So I thought it would be a good idea if we had New Scottish Prints there as well. And I went to the editor to ask if he would sponsor it. And to my amazement, he did. And the Herald was also 200 years old. And almost coincides to the day, not just the week of the end of the American Revolution. And we had Mrs. Thatcher and the Queen come to the Herald for our 200th birthday. Not together, I emphasize, but they came. So I set to put together this show of prints from the 4 Scottish printmakers. And here we have, there's the editor in the centre with me, Arnold Kemp, he was wonderful. We had the gallery was right at Columbus Circle, right by Central Park. It couldn't have been better. That's the building. There's the installation going on, prints by Jackie Parry, who was a founder member of Glasgow Print Studio and is a close friend still. This is our catalogue, and there's Print Studio in Ingram Street in 1980. The party was splendid. We had the great and good and the arts minister and all that. And Stephen Campbell was there because he was living in New York on a scholarship. There we are. I have thousands of great photographs of artists standing by their work, posing or not posing, artists in their studio, and that's Stephen Campbell by one of his paintings. Dame Barbara Ray is an old friend, and she and I had done several trips. We did one to Chicago, one to New York. You can see in the middle how young we all were, and she had this yellow beetle. And there we are in London. I took a photograph of her. She took a photograph of me. There's one of many pieces I've written about her. That's 1997. One of the other key people was Tony Jones, who came in 1980 to 86 for 6 years. He was a fantastic director, the best we've ever had of Glasgow School of Art. And there's him with an Egon Schiele exhibition. And one day he said to me, "Why aren't you going to New York? It's like getting on a bus." So I thought, fine, I'll go. So I did. So here's Tony celebrating Cyril Gerber's 70th birthday in the art school, in the Mac. And Cyril was the only person who had a contemporary commercial gallery in Glasgow at that time. Here is John Bellany and me in New York, 83. You can see you've got all this lovely information underneath. Jack Knox came as head of painting. Bert Irvin brought his colour. John Bellany got his arm round Elizabeth Blackadder, and with her husband, John Houston, they, of course, as you know, taught at Edinburgh College. There's John and Helen. He had a big show at the Gallery of Modern Art in 86, and there he is in his studio, one of many photographs. So we got as far as Artists at Work, 1986, for the Edinburgh Festival. And the story is that 2 of these artists, I wish I got a pointer to show you, Phil Graham and his pal Ian Hughes, got a bit fed up of so many exhibitions at Edinburgh Festival from international foreign emerging artists that wasn't very good. The year before, they'd had a fairly lukewarm show of emerging French artists, young French artists. And they decided to protest and hang their paintings on the railings of the RSA, as John Bellany and Sandy Moffat had done in previous years. And it got the attention of the Edinburgh Festival director, Frank Dunlop, who is still going, and he's like 97, and I'm still in touch with him. So he got in touch with the two boys and said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, we need a major exhibition of young emerging Scottish artists, and we want Clare Henry to curate it. Now, I had no idea that anything was going on at all, and the first I knew was a phone call from Frank Dunlop, director of the festival, saying, I need to see you. What are we going to do? And so what we did was the now iconic exhibition, The Vigorous Imagination. But there wasn't time to organize that with waving a wand. So he said, why don't we do Scottish Art Today, Artists at Work? And these days it would be like in pop-up situations. Quite a few of the artists were at Edinburgh. And that's the entrance to Edinburgh and the programme. There were 12 artists. There's another arts minister with Keith. And so the arts minister came and went, but then I got another phone call from Frank to say, what are you doing on Wednesday and can you help me out? And I said, sure. How can I help? And he said, well, I have to be in Paris that day. Could you look after Sean Connery for me? So I said, well, I think I could manage that. And so I had the pleasure, the real pleasure of looking after Sean Connery for a day and taking him around Edinburgh to all the artists' studios. And here he is in the studio of Ian Hughes. And Ian is at work, as you can see. And Sean Connery is being interviewed, of course, for television. There's an installation that Keith McIntyre did. Here's now right in the middle, in the suit, in the dark suit. That's Frank, with Sheila Colvin, who was his deputy, and the artists. It was all. We had lots of dinners, lots of parties. So the following year, this, with some of you, I hope you actually saw this show, The Vigorous Imagination, 1987. It was the main show for the Edinburgh Festival at the Gallery of Modern Art, and it had more visitors than anything that the Gallery of Modern Art has ever had. This is a tremendous, tremendous facade banner by Sam Ainsley. Here we are installing the banner, and at the right side are the artists. Sam is the one at the far left with the blonde hair. There's me at the opening. I was so delighted it went so well. You can see I'm smiling, beaming ear to ear. So on the left is Adrian Wisniewski's, one of his paintings. Middle is Stephen Campbell. And the right side is Callum Colvin's photograph, the assembled, constructed photographs that he does. And you'll know that he is head of photography at Dundee. And that image was on the front of the Edinburgh Festival brochure that they print like hundreds and hundreds of thousands and send them around the world. And that image was on the front. Of course, this is long before the internet, long. Here we have press day interviews for Channel 4, Joan Bakewell, Dame Joan Bakewell for BBC. David Mack's installation. And there's Sam Ainsley with her installations, as well as the banner. She did these stairways, fantastic, red, of course. This is Kate Whiteford, and her red and green room, she had a whole room, and we had to have a notice outside saying, if you've got a migraine, don't come in, because it was so, would affect you. Here's the crowds. We had crowds and crowds every day. And we had so much press coverage. We had like 5 of those screens covered, absolutely covered with with press cuttings. Everybody came. People flew in from America. They even flew up from London, which is, as you know, difficult. So 30 years on, we did another 2 shows. One in Edinburgh. There's Callum Colvin at the top being interviewed, and one in Glasgow at there was the Fine Arts Society and Bilcliffe and Sam Ainsley. There's me with a Peter Howson poster. This is just for fun. The straw locomotive was the same year, and George Wiley was. I have 1,000 photographs of lovely George. Here he is, and this is an article that I wrote last year, not long ago, when the Wileum, which is in Greenock, that's when it opened. So he now has a terrific new building. You can see in the center an image of it. I recommend that everybody goes. It's not very big, but it's just great. This is just to remind me about India, because Nikki Hicks and I and Anish Kapoor went to India to a conference, and that was a whole adventure in itself. So we've got to 1990, when Glasgow was European capital of culture, and David Mack, who had been in the Vigorous Imagination, did the standout piece, the paper Parthenon at Tramway, and I think the photographs just tell you everything. I had met him in 1982 in London when he was making this Polaris submarine, and there's the tyres, and there's what he made of it at the South Bank. It was at the South Bank, and it was. Here is the Compass Gallery birthday show for 1990 at Tramway. And I did a show, and until I was doing this, I'd forgotten all about it, but I did a show at Glasgow School of Art with loans from IBM. You can see on the right side, that's my mum and me, and that's Gilbert and George picture. So on to 1990 and the celebrations. The biggest thing I ever had anything to do with was Scotland at the Venice Biennale, which was a tremendous project, and very difficult, no money, but was a huge success. Here are the artists: Kate Whiteford, David Mack again, because he's always up for anything and so good, and Arthur Watson. There they are, standing under the banner. So when I went to Venice to meet with the director of the Biennale, he almost started with offering me the Esedra. The Esedra is that yellow splodge underneath. The top big one is the Venice pavilion. The one to the right of the splodge is the American pavilion that usually comes with a kind of $8 million budget. And I actually seriously thought he was just having me on. He was just pulling my leg. But he wasn't. He was serious. And here we are on a visit with the artists, and Richard DeMarco is in the centre there. That was December, and that's how that space can look in December. And that is how the transformation made by Kate Whiteford with this amazing land art piece and poured concrete. She was just tremendous. And the bottom part is Arthur Watson. And then I will show you in a minute the other end. This, where I am standing, is where the David Mack pieces were. So this is Professor Carandante, who was so good to us, being interviewed. And we had a piper, and a handsome piper. He was a friend from London, but who came from Scotland, and who was superb. He was a superb piper. And there is the British Pavilion, and he is acting as Pied Piper and leading all of the visitors and press from the Anish Kapoor exhibition down to the Esedra. And there he is in the center. This is one of David Mack's trees, and those trees behind the piper aren't the bonsai trees, aren't real ones. They are laser cut steel by David. So we made the front page of almost all the European newspapers the following day. The one on the left is the Italian paper, and the one on the right is me writing about the Venice triumph for Scots sculptors. And Barbara Grigger, who's in the blue trousers, she was the founder and director of the Scottish Sculpture Trust. And without her and the Scottish Sculpture Trust, this wouldn't have happened at all, not at all. She's with Henry Merrick Hughes from the British Council, who was a stalwart friend of all of us. And in the next photograph, there's Professor Giovanni Carandante, Barbara, and Angela Rapson, who did all of the admin. There's Arthur and me. It's colourful. We were happy. So there were so many things. I could do a whole hour on 1990. There were so many good projects. But one of these I thought you might be interested in is the Haymarket Station. And in the bottom photograph, you have John Bellamy, Alan Davey, and Adrian Wisniewski looking very young. And they designed these huge, huge pictures that were printed at Peacock, Aberdeen, by Arthur Watson, who's in the top right picture, standing in front of a print that's in my house that I have, that I bought, having dried it with a hairdryer long ago. And they were printed in Aberdeen. And here's Adrian signing his editions in my house, because it was the only space available. And I think the best thing that came out of 1990, quite serious now, is the long-term benefits of changing places, exactly that. And Murray, who's in the bottom left of this, he has a show opening like next week at the Glasgow Print Studio. And this was the Print Studio and lots of other places. They made links with people internationally so that, for instance, Stuart, who's an etcher and a mezzotint artist, he made contact with people in Jerusalem. And so how many years is that? 35 years on, he's still in touch with them. He still goes to Jerusalem. They still swap exhibitions. So people made links to all over the world. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of links, and to do with people and artists exchanging studios and help and knowledge and exhibitions, etc. So I think that was the fundamental plus that came out of it. There was also controversy, and this was a big, I think it still rumbles on. There was a properly run competition for 2 huge murals, paintings for the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow. And Ian McCulloch was the winner with no debate. However, when it came to it, the director of the concert hall didn't like the murals and refused to have them. And I don't know whether the court case is still ongoing, but it could be. So the police, this went on. There's Stephen Campbell on the side of his friend, another artist, painter, Ian McCulloch, trying to even get in. And it was a very sad censorship of the visual arts. Very sad, should never have happened, and didn't reflect well on anybody. So I started out with 250 words, for which I was paid £5. And then I progressed till I was paid £12. And at the beginning, I wrote every day. And by keeping my elbows well out, I ended up with several series that took up the entire page, the entire newspaper sort of thing. That one was about collectors. Pop Goes the Easel was about collectors, which I did that's October 92. And the first time we had colour, because remember it was all black and white, but I didn't even Xerox it in colour. So that was another row about between Julian Spalding and Angus Grossart, but that takes too long to tell as well. Anyway, I got a very big amount of space, which was wonderful, and I hope it was very good for the artists, because now, of course, it doesn't happen. Everything's online. But to dictate half a page, 1,000 words, took about an hour, and you had to do it at night. And the copy takers were all men, and they just liked the football. And if I was to say a word like impasto, you could hear them groaning and sighing, and oh my goodness. So I've always had to keep my words fairly straightforward, even to please the copy takers. So this was a art critic's choice that I did in London in Cork Street, which was such good fun. And I've done several critics' choice shows. So then, here we go. I ran away to Manhattan, and Chicago features in this story because there were great links between Glasgow and Chicago, probably helped by Tony Jones, who, though Welsh, had come from Chicago and went back to Chicago. And so I was there. The art fair in Chicago was the one. It was the first one. They're all over the place now, but Chicago Art Fair was on the pier. It was just fabulous. And that it still goes on. I'd love to go. So Glasgow, I took the key to the city. Glasgow was twinned with Chicago in 1985. And I was there to present the key to Mayor Washington, who's in the center in the suit. And he was the first ever black mayor of Chicago. So think about that, 1985, and the first time. And he was just impressive, a terrific guy. And there am I at the presentation. So spool on a few years until 1999. And I was invited to be the final juror of an art exhibition in Chicago in the, excuse me, coldest weather of the year. And I wasn't even terribly thrilled about going, but off I went. It was January, and they wanted me there on, like, being America, January the 1st. But I went. But on the way back, I decided to go through New York. And there I met my husband. And so, needless to say, being in Manhattan from 1999 to 2017, 18, with the good years when the money was flowing, the Financial Times opened every door. I re-met people like Frank Steller, who I'd met in 1981 at Edinburgh's Dovecote Tapestries. And there I am with Chuck Close in his studio. And I got to know a lot of artists, Christo being one of them, Christo and his wife. And I did do some, that's a piece for State, which is a free magazine that's good fun, that comes out of London. You see that, Debs and Dollars on the gala circuit, that was good fun. And there in the middle are Christo, and there's my lovely husband, Philip, in Central Park when Christo did this very, very impressive, successful, dramatic, these orange gates. And Philip walked to work through Central Park every day, and he swears that he did every inch of, there were miles and miles of the gates. There's Marina Abramovich, who I got to know in Venice, and we had a place upstate, a house that in the country, and she lived quite near, so that was good fun because I got to know her much better. And there she is in Edinburgh at the fruit market. Photographers always like to stand on a ladder and look up or look down, but and I think that is probably a Herald photographer. And for my next to the last shot, in case anybody there from the gallery world is going to be interested, because eventually this portrait of Clare and Philip will need to have a home, and it's not finished yet, it's in progress, by Linda and Barry Atherton, who taught at Glasgow. And there we are, surrounded by Philip's catalogues. Philip gave 75 works of art to the Hunterian in celebration of his 90th birthday. And this is the end, because you've heard quite enough from me. And this is our wedding in New York, which was just wonderful. The party afterwards was terrific. And we were married at St. Peter's Church at Lexington at 54th, because Philip had been on the church committee or church board trustees of for art for the church. And the church is a modern, when I say modern, I think it was the 1970s. It's the one with the kind of 45-degree top that you can see from any plane or any view of Manhattan. And it has a lot of art in it, all due to Philip's encouragement. And that is the end.